Dodecahedron is remarkable and unusual because there's not many more than 100 known to exist. Generally, a dodecahedron is a 12-sided item.
There is still a huge amount of mystery around these very peculiar objects.
Across Europe, in fields, riverbeds, and ancient ruins, archaeologists keep uncovering small bronze objects that defy explanation. 12-sided, each face pierced with a different hole, each corner capped with a tiny knob, they appear across the farthest reaches of the Roman Empire. But the Romans themselves never wrote a single word about them. What were they for? Rituals, measuring devices, toys, or something far stranger that history has forgotten? For over a century, these mysterious dodecahedra have teased scholars, ignored records, and refused to fit into any known category. Today, we dive into the silent secrets of an object the empire itself chose to erase.
The Roman dodecahedron. The mystery has finally been solved. These objects, which are sort of maybe 2,000 years old.
And explore why its purpose may hold a key to understanding a lost corner of history. By the Roman Enigma. The first documented discovery of a Roman dodecahedron was recorded in 1739, when one was unearthed near Aston in the English countryside. The local antiquarians who examined it had no idea what they were looking at. It was clearly old. It was clearly deliberate. No natural process produces a 12-faced bronze object with precisely machined holes and decorative knobs. But it matched nothing in the known Roman archaeological catalog. Over the next 2 centuries, more appeared. A steady trickle of finds across northern Europe, each one slightly different in size and surface detail, but unmistakably the same type of object. Same 12 pentagonal faces, same varying hole diameters, same knobs at every vertex. And they ranged from about 4 centimeters across to roughly 11 centimeters, small enough to fit comfortably in the hand, large enough to feel substantial, weighted, purposeful. The distribution pattern was the first clue that something unusual was going on. Roman artifacts are found everywhere the empire reached, from Scotland to Syria, from Portugal to the Persian Gulf. But dodecahedra are not found everywhere. They cluster overwhelmingly in the northern provinces. Gaul, Germania, Britannia, the regions where Roman military and administrative control was imposed over existing Celtic and Germanic populations. They are almost entirely absent from Italy, from Greece, from North Africa, from the Eastern Mediterranean, the Roman heartland. This is a critical detail. Whatever these objects were, they were not standard-issue Roman equipment. They were not part of the empire's centralized material culture. They belonged to the periphery, the frontier, the places where Rome met resistance. Scholars have been throwing theories at the dodecahedra for over 200 years, and none of them have stuck. Candlestick holders. This was an early favorite. The holes could hold candles of varying thicknesses. Except the holes don't show wax residue, the knobs would make the object unstable as a candle base, and the Romans already had perfectly functional candlestick designs that they documented extensively. Military rangefinders. The idea was that a soldier could hold the dodecahedron at arm's length, sight through the holes at a distant standard or flag, and use the different hole sizes to estimate range. It's a clever theory. It's also completely unsupported by any military text, any training manual, or any archaeological context linking dodecahedra to military installations or battlefields. Most of them are found in civilian contexts, knitting gauges. This theory surfaced in the 20th century when someone demonstrated that yarn could be wrapped around the knobs to produce a tubular knit, essentially using the dodecahedron as a spool knitting tool. The demonstration worked. But there is zero textile residue on any known specimen. The bronze knobs would shred fiber over repeated use.
A restoration of a bunch of bronze doorknobs, and it was bronze doorknob day.
And the Romans already had efficient textile tools that bore no resemblance to dodecahedra, survey instruments, flower arranging stands, children's toys, dice. Each theory explains one or two features of the object while ignoring the rest. Yet the varying hole sizes remain unexplained. The knobs remain unexplained. The geographic distribution remains unexplained. And the absolute silence in the written record remains the most unexplained thing of all. Something about these objects resisted categorization in the ancient world, and it continues to resist it today. A specimen perfected. Then, in June 2023, something remarkable happened in a muddy field in Lincolnshire. A group of amateur archaeologists, members of the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, led by a retired secretary named Richard Parker, were conducting a routine metal-detecting survey on farmland near the village of Norton Disney, about 12 miles south of Lincoln. The village sits on the site of a known Roman settlement, and the group had been finding modest artifacts there for years: pottery shards, corroded coins, fragments of brooches, the usual background noise of Roman Britain. Then Parker's detector gave a signal. He dug carefully, and there, roughly 18 inches below the surface of a plowed field, sitting in what would later be identified as the remains of a deliberately cut pit, was a Roman dodecahedron in near-perfect condition. It was extraordinary. Most dodecahedra are found corroded, damaged, or fragmentary, the inevitable result of spending nearly 2,000 years underground. The Norton Disney specimen was different. It was complete. Every face intact. Every knob present. The bronze surface still carried a greenish-gold patina, but the structural integrity was remarkable. It weighed approximately 245 grams and measured about 8 centimeters across. The holes were clean, their edges sharp, and their diameters clearly intentional and precisely varied. The object was immediately recognized as significant. It was reported to the local finds liaison officer under the Portable Antiquities Scheme, the United Kingdom's system for recording archaeological objects found by the public, and subsequently transferred for scientific analysis. What the analysis revealed deepened the mystery considerably. Metallurgical examination showed the dodecahedron was cast using a lost wax process, a sophisticated technique that produces high-fidelity reproductions of a wax model. The alloy was a high-tin bronze, carefully controlled, with a composition that indicated deliberate selection of materials rather than casual recycling of scrap metal. This was not a rough frontier product. It was precision work, made by someone who understood metallurgy at an advanced level. But it was the context of the find that proved most revealing. The pit in which the dodecahedron was found was not random. It had been deliberately excavated, lined, and backfilled. The object had not been lost or discarded. It had been buried, intentionally, carefully, in a manner consistent, not with disposal, but with deposition, the archaeological term for the ritual placement of objects in the ground. The Norton Disney Group, working with professional archaeologists from the University of Lincoln, conducted further excavation of the surrounding area. They found evidence of a broader ritual landscape, fragments of pottery associated with funerary practices, traces of burned material, and soil chemistry consistent with repeated fire activity in the immediate vicinity. And the dodecahedron had not been thrown away. It had been put to rest, like a person, like something sacred. The discovery made international news. The BBC covered it. The Guardian ran a feature. For a few weeks in the summer of 2023, a small bronze object from a Lincolnshire field became the most talked-about archaeological find in Europe. The Norton Disney Group, entirely volunteers working weekends with borrowed equipment and donated time, had produced one of the most significant Roman-era discoveries in Britain in years. It was a reminder that archaeology is not exclusively the province of universities and government agencies. Sometimes the most important finds come from retired secretaries with metal detectors and an unreasonable amount of patience. The specimen was subsequently examined by specialists at the British Museum and the University of Lincoln. Initial conservation work stabilized the patina. High-resolution 3D scanning captured every surface detail at sub-millimeter resolution. X-ray fluorescence analysis mapped the elemental composition across the entire object. The data confirmed what the visual inspection suggested. This was not a crude or hasty production. It was the work of a master caster, someone operating at the highest level of Bronze Age metallurgical tradition. A tradition that, by the Roman period in Britain, had been refined over more than 1,000 years. And the most honest thing anyone said about it came from Parker himself, who told reporters with characteristic British understatement, "We still have no idea what it's for." Hidden spirituality. The Norton Disney find didn't solve the mystery, but it did something arguably more important. It shifted the conversation. For decades, the dominant theories about dodecahedra had been functional. They were tools.
6 different measurements because there's 6 different pairs of holes, and then you can check the results using astronomy or a chart.
Instruments, gauges, devices. The Norton Disney evidence pointed in a different direction entirely. The deliberate burial, the ritual landscape, the funerary associations, the fire residue. These were not the signatures of a lost tool. They were the signatures of a lost practice. And once researchers started looking at other dodecahedra through that lens, the pattern became hard to ignore. Multiple specimens have been found in or near burial contexts. A dodecahedron recovered from Krefeld, Germany, was found alongside cremation remains. Others have been discovered near known Celtic sanctuary sites, at river crossings, and at crossroads. The liminal spaces that Celtic and pre-Celtic European cultures regarded as thresholds between the physical world and the unseen world. Places where the veil was thin. Places where you went to speak to the dead or to the gods. Residue analysis on several specimens, a relatively recent development in archaeological science, using techniques borrowed from forensic chemistry, has detected trace organic compounds consistent with cremated human bone, botanical material associated with ritual burning, and in at least one case, compounds associated with psychoactive plant material used in documented Celtic ceremonial practices. The picture that emerges is unsettling and fascinating in equal measure. But the Roman dodecahedra may not be Roman at all. They may be Celtic, or more precisely, they may be products of a hybrid culture, objects created by Celtic communities living under Roman occupation, using Roman metallurgical techniques to produce instruments for practices that Rome had explicitly forbidden. This is where the historical context becomes critical. Rome's relationship with Celtic spiritual practice was not neutral, it was hostile. Julius Caesar described the Druids of Gaul in detail in his Commentary de Bello Gallico, their role as judges, teachers, and intermediaries with the divine, and then he systematically destroyed them. Caesar's accounts, written partly as military dispatches and partly as political propaganda, portrayed Druidic practices as barbaric, de-emphasizing human sacrifice and blood ritual to justify the conquest. Modern historians debate how much of Caesar's description was accurate.
Caesar has raised enough political support to become a senator.
And how much was designed to make Roman intervention look civilized by comparison. What is not debated is what happened next. The Emperor Tiberius issued decrees against Druidic practice in the early 1st century AD. Claudius went further, banning Druidism outright across the empire around 54 AD. In 60 AD, the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus led a military assault on the island of Anglesey, Mona, the Druidic heartland of Britain, burning the sacred groves, killing the priests and priestesses who stood on the shore screaming curses at the invading boats, and scattering the communities that had maintained Celtic spiritual traditions for centuries. Tacitus described the scene in his Annals. the Druids raising their arms to the sky, the women running among them with torches, the Roman soldiers momentarily paralyzed with fear before their discipline reasserted itself and the killing began. Rome didn't just conquer Celtic territory, it tried to erase Celtic religion. But you cannot erase a belief system by burning its temples. You drive it underground. You force it into hidden spaces, coded objects, private rituals conducted in darkness, away from Roman eyes. You force the people who practice it to develop new forms that look innocuous to an occupying power, forms that can be hidden in a house or buried in a field, forms that carry their meaning internally, invisible to anyone who doesn't know what to look for. A 12-faced bronze object with holes and knobs. Meaningless to a Roman soldier, sacred to the person who made it. The absence of dodecahedra from Roman records stops being a mystery when you frame it this way. They're not absent because the Romans didn't notice them. They're absent because the people who used them made absolutely certain that Rome would never understand what they were. Light, shadow, and the universe. There is another dimension to the dodecahedra that moves beyond ritual and into something closer to cosmology. The dodecahedron is not an arbitrary shape. It is one of the 5 Platonic solids, the 5 three-dimensional forms in which every face is an identical regular polygon and every vertex is identical to every other vertex. The tetrahedron, the cube, the octahedron, the icosahedron, and the dodecahedron. In the Platonic tradition, which deeply influenced Roman intellectual culture through the transmission of Greek philosophy, each of these 5 solids was associated with one of the fundamental elements. The tetrahedron was fire, the cube was earth, the octahedron was air, the icosahedron was water, the dodecahedron was the cosmos. Plato wrote in the Timaeus that the god used it for embroidering the constellations on the whole heaven. The dodecahedron, with its 12 faces, was associated with the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 months of the year, the 12 divisions of the celestial sphere. It was not just a shape, it was the shape, the geometric expression of the universe's underlying order, the form that contained all other forms. This was not obscure knowledge. Any educated Roman would have known it. And any Celtic intellectual exposed to Greco-Roman philosophy, and the Druids were described by classical authors as philosophers in their own right, would have recognized the significance immediately. Now consider the holes. Each face of a Roman dodecahedron has a hole of a different diameter, 12 faces, 12 holes, 12 sizes. If you hold the object up to a light source, a candle, a fire, the sun, each hole projects a circle of light of a different diameter. If you rotate the object, the projected circles change. If you align specific faces with a light source at specific times, say the sunrise on a solstice or equinox, the projected circle corresponds to a specific angular measurement. Experimental archaeologists have tested this. In 2012, G.M.C. Wagemans, a Dutch researcher, published a detailed study demonstrating that a dodecahedron could function as an astronomical measuring device, specifically a tool for determining the optimal dates for planting winter grain by measuring the angle of sunlight at specific times of year. The different hole sizes correspond to different solar angles, and therefore to different dates in the agricultural calendar. The theory is elegant. It accounts for the varying hole sizes. It accounts for the geographic distribution, Northern Europe, where agricultural timing is critically dependent on seasonal light angles. It accounts for the knobs, which serve as stable resting points when the object is placed on a flat surface for alignment. And it connects the dodecahedron's astronomical function to its philosophical significance, a single object that is simultaneously a practical tool and a sacred symbol of cosmic order. But it may go deeper still. If the dodecahedron can measure solar angles, it can also measure shadow. And shadow, in Celtic tradition, was not simply the absence of light. It was a presence, a marker of transition. The space between worlds, a shadow cast by a sacred object at a sacred time, in a sacred place. A crossroads, a burial mound, a riverbank would have carried enormous ritual significance. Not fortune-telling in the trivial modern sense, something closer to divination as the ancient world understood it. The reading of cosmic patterns to discern the will of forces larger than human comprehension. A single object, geometry, astronomy, agriculture, ritual, cosmology, all encoded in 12 faces of bronze, and not a single word written about any of it. The Roman dodecahedron mystery. Step back from the Roman dodecahedra for a moment and consider what they represent in a broader historical context. Because this is not just a story about one mysterious object. This is a story about how empires erase cultures, and how cultures refuse to stay erased. The Roman Empire is one of the most documented civilizations in human history. The scholarly literature on Rome fills entire libraries. It is, in many ways, the foundation of Western historical consciousness, the baseline against which we measure everything that came before and everything that came after. And yet here is an object, more than 130 of them, found across a quarter of the empire's territory, that Rome either didn't understand or deliberately ignored. 12 pentagonal faces, small circular holes of varying diameter, solid bronze knobs at every corner. No name, no manual, no explanation. Objects like these appear to encode astronomical knowledge, spiritual practice, and geometric philosophy in a single, portable form. They are made with Roman-level metallurgical skill, yet they exist outside the empire's documentation, deliberately invisible in the official historical record. What does this tell us about how history is written? It tells us that history is written by the literate, by the powerful, by those who control the records. Beneath the official narrative, Senate debates, imperial decrees, military campaigns, there is always another story, a shadow history, carried not in texts, but in objects, in practices, in the coded transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next under conditions of persecution. We have seen this pattern before, not in theory, but in documented fact. When Rome conquered Gaul after Caesar's campaigns of the 50s BCE, the administration imposed the Interpretatio Romana, the systematic rebranding of Celtic gods into Roman equivalents. The Gaulish deity Lu became Mercury. Belinus became Apollo. Cernunnos was absorbed into a vague woodland divinity deemed acceptable to Roman religious frameworks. Temples were rebuilt in Roman style. Latin replaced Gaulish in official inscriptions. On the surface, Romanization appeared complete, but beneath the surface, the old practices survived. And consider the Pillar of the Boatmen, the Pilier des Notes, discovered in 1710 beneath the foundations of what would become Notre Dame de Paris.
The momentous day in Paris, the famed towers of Notre Dame devastated by fire in 2019, now reopening to the public.
Dating to the reign of Tiberius, around 14 to 37 CE, it carries carvings of both Roman gods like Jupiter and unmistakably Celtic deities like Cernunnos and Assus. On a single stone column, two religious systems coexist. The official one facing outward, the forbidden one hiding in plain sight. The Gaulish boatmen who commissioned it knew exactly what they were doing. The dodecahedra follow the same logic, taken a step further. Unlike the public monument of the Pillar of the Boatmen, the dodecahedra are private, portable, and concealable, designed to be hidden, buried, or discarded at a moment's notice. They are the next evolution of cultural resistance. Not military resistance, there were no revolts on the scale of Vercingetorix at Alesia or Boudica in Londinium, but spiritual resistance. The quiet, stubborn insistence of a conquered people that their understanding of the cosmos, their sacred calendar, and their geometry would not be extinguished simply because Rome decreed it. Modern archaeology confirms this. Dr. Miranda Aldhouse Green of Cardiff University has documented how native spiritual practices.
Cardiff University leaders have defended their decision-making over plans to cut hundreds of jobs and close some departments.
Persisted across Gaul and Britain throughout the Roman period. Votive deposits, ritual offerings of weapons, animal remains, and carved objects continued at sites like the source of the Seine at Gournay-sur-Arronde, well into the early Roman era. These were not isolated incidents. They were the visible edges of a widespread underground tradition. The dodecahedra, concentrated in precisely the same northern provinces, fit this pattern perfectly. Recent developments have brought the dodecahedra back into scholarly focus. The 2023 Norton Disney discovery generated public fascination, millions of social media views, and mainstream media coverage from outlets including the New York Times and Smithsonian Magazine. This renewed interest has unlocked funding for systematic study. Residue analyses at multiple European institutions, distribution mapping through the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and computational modeling to test astronomical alignment hypotheses. Yet the fundamental challenge remains. These objects were designed to be understood only by those who used them. Their meaning was never written down, not because the makers were illiterate, but because writing it down would have been dangerous. The knowledge was oral, experiential, and embodied in practice rather than text. Caesar himself noted that Druids deliberately refused to write down sacred teachings because they believed written knowledge could be misused or diluted, which means we may never fully decode them. We may reconstruct the geometry, identify the residues, map the find sites, and build a compelling circumstantial case for their function. But the lived experience of holding a dodecahedron in a firelit room, aligning it with the midwinter sunrise and tracing its shadow across the threshold between this world and the next, that experience is gone. It belonged to people careful enough to leave no record and brave enough to keep their traditions alive under the shadow of empire. The dodecahedra are their monument, small, silent, enduring. And they survived the empire that tried to suppress them. They survived centuries that forgot them. And they are still asking the same question they always have. Are we paying attention? And so the Roman dodecahedra remains. Silent, precise, unclaimed. A mystery that has survived empires, conquests, and centuries of oblivion. We've uncovered fragments of their story, glimpses of their purpose, but the full meaning still slips through our fingers, hidden in geometry, bronze, and shadow. What messages were these objects meant to carry? Whose knowledge were they preserving, and why was it so dangerous to speak of it? The answers are out there, buried in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to follow the trail through the quiet corners of history. And the question lingers: how many other truths have been hidden from us, just beyond the reach of memory, waiting for the patient and the curious to listen?